Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Undercurrents, the Harlem Mosque Incident. Yes. I have to admit something to everybody. Yes, I have to come clean. I'm officially obsessed with this story. I can't get it out of my mind. It's like all I'm thinking about for the past couple weeks. In fact, just to show you how hardcore I've gotten, in addition to Circle of Six, on the suggestion of a couple other law enforcement friends of mine, I bought the following books: No Heroes by Danny Colson, Inside the FBI's Secret Counterterrorism Force. I bought Chief by Al Seidman, the amazing book written by the chief of detectives during that period. And last but not least, I bought Target Blue by Daley, who was the communications director for the NYPD in those years. And all of these books, of course, go fairly deeply into the Harlem Mosque Incident, the Black Liberation Army, the police assassinations that were going on at the time. But we are blessed. And why are we blessed? Because, as you all know, we like to get our information from firsthand primary sources. So even though these books are great, and I learned a lot out of them, also got a little confused from some of the information here too, which we'll maybe go over, but nothing beats the real thing. So without further ado, may I introduce to you the man of the hour. You all know him, and hopefully you all love him. The one. Moet, get in your seat for this one. The only Randy Jurgensen. Yes. How are you? How are you, Detective Randy?
Okay.
It's great seeing you again. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, one of the things that I forgot to mention was, and you've mentioned this publicly, so it's not a secret. You were the guy that shot Sonny Corleone on that famous bridge, huh?
Yes, yes, I was. Uh, be- Before we get started, those books, they're The Chief,
Mm-hmm.
Seedman, and Target Blue by Robert Daly. Um, Within a week after April 14th, 1972, both of them, uh, like in high noon, dropped their badges and quit over this case.
Right, exactly. I mean,
They
you can
left
tell,
the police department over this case.
right, and you can tell their frustration, particularly Daly, who seemed to want to do the right thing. I don't know. I mean, you were there, not me. I mean, that's the
Right.
beauty of having living history with us on the air with us. But I found these books to be very informative. I mean, your books and these books were generally all, covered the same thing. These went into a little bit more detail, particularly No Heroes and Chief went into details on more details on the police assassinations, which your book wasn't about. But it's all connected. It's all part of the same string of terror operation that was happening in New York City in the late 60s and early 70s. And I'm just becoming so interested in this story because it just ticks the right boxes for me. All this just horrible management, this terrible outcome. And of course, the cast of characters is interesting as well. So, Randy, of course, thank you so much for joining us on part two. So today we have quite a bit to get to. Today I want to talk to you about the FBI and involvement, which we did not touch last week. I want to talk about also the famous Blue Book. But before we get into that, one of the things that we left off last week was you were talking about the Harlem Mosque incident, of course, and this character here. Let me just get this up. This character here, and this is a very famous picture of you. And now I have a newfound respect for you because you must be a huge guy. Because this guy, Louis Dupree, the guy you nabbed for the killing, this guy was humongous, and you're the same size as him. So,
While you have that picture up,
yeah.
I just want to point out to you the detective all the way as I look at the picture to the left,
This
yeah,
guy here.
that's Detective Nick Cirillo, who worked in the Manhattan DA's office, who was in charge under Seidman. He was in charge of getting the Black Liberation, getting them. He formed up a team to go out and get them. We can go into that a little bit more. And his nickname down there was the Rock.
Was the Rock.
The Rock in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. This here, standing to his left, is Vito Navarra, and that is the partner of Phil Cardillo, who was killed. If you see Louis 17X Dupree handcuffed, I went on the day after I set this up, I went on the day and I took Phil Cardillo's handcuffs out of the, we had them in the property clerk's office, in the DA's office. I took them out and I handcuffed Dupree with Phil Cardillo's handcuffs. And
that must have felt great.
And I know you're supposed to film before the phone rings, that you're supposed to, cuff them in the back. I purposely did that in front because I knew that this picture was going to be taken, and I wanted everybody to see that was his partner, Phil Cardillo's handcuffs, that locked up Louis 17X Dupree.
Now, this guy, Louis 17X Dupree, we're going to talk about him a little bit more as we go along in today's interview, especially vis-a-vis the FBI. But one thing that I want to, I don't think it's any surprise. Most of the people who know this story know that you arrested this guy for Officer Cardillo's murder. And through various machinations and also possibly I think that there might have been some jury stuff going on. I don't quote me on that. You would know better than me. But this guy was acquitted. Now, having said that, how sure are you that this is the guy who did it?
Well, I am absolutely sure. And the key witness to the shooting, which there were two, but the key witness was a Muslim, and his name was Foster 2X Thomas. He described to a T, not only in the grand jury, but through two trials, of what Louis 17X Dupree did, in the moment, on that day, in that hall, in Minister Louis Farrakhan's Mosque number 7.
Right. And I want to just show something that's fairly ironic. The audience, I think, is going to flip out. So after we did our first interview, you're a popular guy, Randy. I got so many emails from cops thanking me for having you on and saying how great it was and how much they loved it. And one of them is an old friend of mine from the Son of Sam days. And he said, "You're not going to believe this." He said, "This guy, Louis Dupree, was in a movie 2 years after the incident." So in 1974, Louis Dupree, in this movie, The Super Cops, okay, which is a fairly obscure movie. I never heard of it before, but he plays, and it's about these two detectives, Dave Greenberg and Robert Hance, who are known as Batman and Robin. Now, real quick, before we get into Louis Dupree, what was up with this guy over here? Was he a homosexual? Like, what's the deal with why is he dressed like this?
He's dressed with the times of the street.
Okay.
Because that's where, and I can't say that enough or stress that enough. Whatever's going to happen, it's not happening in City Hall in Albany. It's not happening even in one police plaza. It's happening out in the street.
Right. And
so they're dressed exactly as the street was dressing at that particular time. This is the 70s.
Right. Okay. All right. So I just wasn't sure because he looked like one of these. I mean, I don't want to disparage the guy's look, but he looks like one of these characters from the movie Cruisin', which you were sort of technically involved with. So, but I know.
let me tell you something. These two guys, you know, they left the grid the same way as Sonny Grasso and Eddie Egan left the grid. If they didn't do that, there'd be no French Connection. And if these guys didn't do what they went and did, there'd be no Super Cops. They began
Yeah,
to
I was
make
gonna.
movies after what we were doing in the street.
Well, I was gonna say that all joshing aside, these guys. I was doing a little bit of history searching on them, and they were commendable police. I mean, I know that one of them later got in trouble with the law for after he was retired. But on the street, apparently they were amazing cops. And so this movie Super Cops was about them. And of course, this is Patrick Murphy, who was the police commissioner, I believe, at the time of this event, the Harlem Mosque Incident. This movie has in it Louis X Dupree. Okay. And I'm showing these stills because I want to get a sense for the audience how huge this guy was. All right. Here he is in a fight scene. And if you watch this, and I don't want to show video clips because we'll get like a copyright strike. But if you watch this movie, this guy is a towering, powerful man, huge. Here he is picking up Ron Liebman like he's a sack of potatoes, like nothing, right? And then throwing him over the car like he's a featherweight. And then here he is. He goes and he's about to destroy this other cop here. I mean, look at the size of this person, right? So, and then here it's a little hard to see. He's like twice the size of of Rob Liebman. I mean, look how huge this guy is. I could see him, Randy. And then, of course, the thing is that he's an actual detective in the movie, which I found to be actually quite disgusting. And then at the last scene of the movie, it's him dressed as a detective, as a I guess as a sergeant or a police officer.
And I think he's
Yeah, and he's huge, and I could see this guy, the size that he was, the hands the size of a football. I could see this guy easily doing what they accused him of doing in the Harlem Mosque, which was beating up cops and shooting one in cold blood. I could see this person doing it. Do you have any thoughts about him in this movie?
Well, yes. First of all, you know what was happening in the hallway. You know, he was in the hallway of the mosque. He was not alone.
Right.
He was not alone. The cry went out, Allah Akbar, and that was it. So when the movies, and when there were a lot in the 70s, were in New York City, around the world, especially in the Orient, you know, Japan, China, New York City is the star of the movie. You can have Gene Hackman, but it's New York City. So there was a lot of movie making. So they have security, and the security consists of a unit within the police department, a very, very effective unit. They're in uniform, and they with every movie that's being made, they are sent as security to make sure things run in order, yada yada yada.
Mm-hmm.
And their security. Aside from that, then you need spaces, locations that have to be secured, which you get permits for, and they have to be watched overnight. So now you don't get uniform force to do that. Now you get basically off-duty police officers that are allowed to work and, you know, and do that job. Well, suddenly on a picture called Across 110th Street, the Muslims took over that position. The Muslims were the ones that were watching the spaces. The Muslims were the ones that were watching. Nothing was taken from the trucks that were left overnight. And so I could see very easily, and I saw it firsthand in making movies, where the off-duty cops who had permission to work, you know, all of a sudden the director might say, and it's happened, hey, can you do this part here? Can you do this? Well, that's what I see and I believe that this movie was filmed in Brooklyn.
Hmm.
So and the Muslims were now doing that part of the security work.
Okay.
On police officers do. So I can see that Louis could have been picked out or pulled out to absolutely do that part, to play that part. However, I don't know if that is a fact. I do know that Louis 17X Dupree was not in Screen Actors Guild, which
Right.
which you have lines. You have to belong to a Screen Actors Guild.
It's a big no-no. Yeah. Unless
So,
you're exempt, but
absolutely. Um, when Phil Cardillo got shot, I am paraphrasing testimony from grand jury and two trials. What the witnesses saw was Louis 17X Dupree in the lobby, along with 15, 16 others, right?
Mhm.
And Phil Cardillo was on the floor, and he reached to get Phil Cardillo's gun. Our guns back then, they did have a safety, and it was very hard leather, and you just couldn't ordinarily just pull the gun out.
Right.
So what in great detail the witnesses said that they saw was that Louis grabbed the gun and he lifted the gun out of the holster, lifting Phil off the floor.
You can easily see this guy doing that. Easily.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
And the holster ripped. Now, to stop for a moment there, during the investigation, when we saw that the holster was ripped, and the DA's office, the Manhattan DA's office, went to Columbia University with a holster with the same amount of time on the job. You know, Phil had 5 years on the job. We took a cop's holster that had 5 years on the job. We took it to Columbia University, and they gave it a stress test. And as you went to pull the gun out, and sooner or later, right, you saw the stitches rip, just like it ripped on Phil Cardillo's holster on that day. And when the gun came out, Louis, according to witnesses who testified in a grand jury and through two trials, Louis 17X Dupree shot Phil Cardillo with his own gun.
So then seeing this guy in a movie playing a cop, did word get around law enforcement circles back then, or did this just fly under the radar? Because I would imagine this would be a huge slap in the face.
Well, now my time, you have to understand my time frame from back then, right? You know, this happened in 1972. I believe this movie was made in 1974.
74.
I didn't have him yet.
You didn't have him yet, so
No.
so really, it
No,
was
nothing.
So no one really knew that this guy had done this, other than his compatriots, his friends, the
Well,
people who were with him.
I don't know who knew who. No, I didn't have him then.
Right.
I didn't get the witnesses until late 74 or whatever it was.
Okay. So this guy's walking the streets. I mean, he must have felt a huge rush of power and also dominance. Like, here he is. He just killed a cop, allegedly. I mean, even though, you know, I'm just going to say that just for legalese purposes. And then 2 years later, he's playing a policeman in a movie. He must have loved this in his mind. I mean, I'm just assigning motivation to him, but I don't know. There's just something really evil about this, the fact that he was doing this. And
I don't know if the word is evil, but yeah, it's irony.
yeah, irony, and you know, and a little bit of a black heart, because I mean, you know, this is not cool. If he knew what he did, right, and then, you know, and then he's doing these roles. But so this Louis Dupree character, it's interesting that so how many people knew he was in this movie? I mean, did it get around then after he got busted for Cardillo?
I believe that Sonny Grasso wrote a book called Murder at the Harlem Mosque. And I believe there is a picture in that Murder at the Harlem Mosque book, I believe there's a picture showing Louis Dupree.
In that movie.
Yes.
Interesting. You know, it's funny. That book is the only one that I did not buy, Randy, because it's like $100, $120. It's very rare and it's very expensive. So I figured, well, uh, I'm not doing too well business wise. Let me save up for that one.
Okay.
But so Louis Dupree is an interesting character. All right, so he is in the scrum in the Harlem Mosque. This guy is humongous. He rips the guy's leather holster. Did they do any tests, like how much tensile strength it took to rip the?
Yes, we did. I don't know the numbers. The professor, his last name was Testa, Testa,
Uh-huh.
and I witnessed it, and of course, testified at the trial.
Because it must have taken a huge amount of force. I mean, anyone out there try to rip leather right now, even 5-year-old leather, try to rip it.
Well,
It's
it
like,
was the stitches.
oh, it
So
was the stitches. Okay.
Steve, Steve has Steve has this is my copy of Murder at the Harlem Mosque,
Okay.
and yes, I remember right. I don't know.
Ah,
Am I holding it right?
you are, and it's virtually the same photograph. Let me. It's a little out of focus, but it's virtually the same still that I got from the movie.
Does that work?
It's a little blurry because your background is blurry and it's melding it. There it looks better, but people can see it. They can get an idea. So
And
yeah.
that's Sonny Grasso and Randy Jurgensen. Yeah.
So yeah, it's to me that's a sickening twist of events, considering what this guy was responsible for. But he also comes up
Just
in.
just remember, Manny, we never convicted him.
Yeah, I understand, but
He, he was
you
he was found not guilty. Yeah, he was not found innocent. He was found not guilty.
right. But that's why I asked, like, what did you know? Like, because I'm gonna take that into account more than a jury trial in New York City. What you knew, and you're absolutely convinced that this was the guy that did it.
Yes.
Okay. And
Yes.
so that's good enough for me, and I think that's probably good enough for most of the people watching. Because I mean, because in Circle of Six, it you describe, all of the work that you did tracking this guy down and speaking to the witnesses and so on and so forth. It wasn't a 2-bit investigation. It was a heavy duty investigation you did. All right, so Louis 17X Dupree comes up in the next topic that I want to talk about, which is, of course, and you can choose the order, Randy, since you're the guest, but we have to talk about the Blue Book, and we have to talk about the FBI. And so you decide which one you want to tackle first. I have plenty of slides. I have the Blue Book ready.
Okay.
So whatever makes more sense narratively, you go ahead.
At the at the end of the day,
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, the I guess I'm going to say, a 4-year. I got the witness in 74. I think that I locked up Lewis in 74, maybe 75, and we didn't go to trial until 77.
Mm-hmm.
And we went to trial 2 times. And all during that period, which we're going to get into, I was chasing and catching, not by myself, the BLA.
Right.
While all of that was going on, while it was going on, so it goes to this. It goes to, I believe, Najari. Najari was handling the special prosecutor's office at the time. By the way, it was located in the Twin Towers.
Okay.
And, after we sent everything over to them, every single thing, I don't know if we sent the uniform or the guns and stuff like that, but all the testimony or all the investigation, because it was in a special prosecutor's office, and they really went, 9 to 10, if you know, 1 to 10 on it.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly, there's the Blue Book. There's the Blue Book. So now we had heard we had heard about the Blue Book. And one of the first times that I heard about the Blue Book was Vito Navarra, who was Phil Cardillo's partner, who would sit in the precinct every day while the investigation was going on. He once said to me, they have a Blue Book, he says, and it's about the killing of my partner, and they never even interviewed me. That was the first that I heard about the Blue Book. Now, a subsequent investigation, and this is all after the fact, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Blue Book, there were sometimes I hear just 6 copies. Other times I hear there were just 8 copies. 8 copies, and the Blue Book started from the police commissioner, and it started in 1972 sometime, and it was complete by 1973.
So it started right after, and
right
while you're talking here, we have a copy of it. It's 74 pages. We're not going to go through the entire thing, but I will put this on my Twitter and Facebook for people to download.
So,
report.
So what's important about the Blue Book? Well, we could do an hour if we had the assistant district attorney who took us to trial, two times here. In the Blue Book, I mean, it actually has ballistics reports. We never had. It actually had that they interviewed people, and in one it says that they feel that the people might be leaving town and stuff like that. They actually interviewed people in there, and I believe one of them was a police officer in the transit authority. Look, the same as I'm a Roman Catholic, and I attend St. Patty's. Let's say, there are cops that are Muslims, and they attend, they attend the mosque. So what they were doing there that day, I haven't the slightest idea. But there was a wealth of information in the Blue Book that would have been very, very helpful to the prosecution.
Well, here you have chronology of events surrounding the shooting of police officer Philip Cardillo. Now, this is well, see, that's another thing that bothers the hell out of me about this case, because not only was that day messed up, right? Like Benjamin Ward telling the cops to leave the white cops, and then out Farrakhan ordering Detective Seidman out of the basement, and then everyone telling you to stand down when there's all this rioting going on. That's bad enough. But then you have this report done, and they don't even share it with the investigating detective. That speaks to me of something deeper here, of a much deeper cover-up.
Well, at the same time that was going on, Robert Daly, who wrote that book, Target Blue, he was writing Target Blue, right? And 1PP, there was great concern as to what he was going to put in that book. Now, remember, on the day that it happened, Robert Daly was the DCPI, Deputy of Public Information, a very powerful position within the police department. Mm-hmm. And he wanted to speak. He wanted to speak along the lines like it was not an invasion, and we didn't go in there to do this, and we didn't shoot anybody and stuff, because the rumors were flying left and right all over the place.
And also, he was very clear in this book, Randy, that it was in fact a riot.
Well, that's what they were afraid of. They were afraid that this Blue Book was going to come out and say that. And I am told personally, in the bathroom on the 3rd floor of 1PP, when they called me down there and said, Jurgensen, from somebody who told me, which I have great respect for, said, they're giving you the mosque case. This was 1 year later. the things that he said to me in the bathroom there, what was going to happen, what was not going to happen, so forth and so on. And, you're not going to be able to go towards the mosque and blah, blah, blah. And there is concern, Randy, of what Robert Daly is writing in Target Blue. Now, while I was investigating the case, Robert Daly, who left the job on a Sunday, the mosque opened on Friday, he quit on Sunday.
Right.
So he called me up. I met him in a diner in the Midtown, and he began to ask me, and I said, and to this day, he's written the respect. I said, Bob, I can't tell you what I'm doing. I can't tell you. I really can't tell you that day. So there's another book that came out, like Murder at the Harlem Mosque, like when Selman Rab writes in the New York Times, a very good coverage. They did this. They did that. They did the other thing. And Manny, you and I've discussed this with you. I was not going to write a book that they did this.
Right.
My book names the players, if you will.
Right. And it's very important to have gotten this on history because.
Okay. So, but none of this, Manny, I just want to say that none of this has really anything to do with the Black Liberation Army.
Right. Of course. I didn't even really realize that until I got deeper into this case, that they're kind of two separate things. The only connection really is the fact that you were staking out Twyman Myers the morning of the Harlem Mosque incident. In my conspiratorial mind, I can't help but think that somebody above knew that and they purposely, but that's just my crazy conspiratorial mind. I see a connection there, but I know that you said absolutely not. So we're going to go with that. Now, I'm looking at this blue book as we're talking here. And Randy, they had here, while Navarro was on the second floor, police officers Negron and Padillo entered the mosque. They observed, they have what people are saying. They have Cardillo shouting, my partner's upstairs. You didn't have any of this to help you. They didn't give you this.
No. The ballistics report, the people that they interviewed, that would have been great. That would have been great. Because, part of the investigation, again, we're going back to the mosque, part of the investigation, and it was every I had to be dotted in this. It was that the mosque insisted that we invaded the place.
Right.
And that Phil was shot by friendly fire. So the ballistics report would have proved otherwise. Absolutely, that's not what happened. So if we'd had that would have squashed that in part of the investigation. And
exactly.
Things, yes. And there's a number of things in there.
Well, I'm just going through here. I'm looking for the ballistics, which I don't think we're going to find. But I mean, I'm going to read this with a fine-tooth comb. Here we go. 4 bullets were recovered, one of which was readable. Determined that this bullet.
We recovered one. I recovered one bullet. In fact, I didn't recover it. Richie Race recovered one bullet on the floor, and that was the bullet. Yes, later on, did we recover a bullet? Yes, during the first trial, which was 1977, which is virtually 5 years after. Yep. The court instructed me and the assistant district attorney to go back to the mosque and get the bullets out of the wall, which we did. And I think there's pictures of that.
They were still there several years later, huh? Yes. And of course, here's Louis Dupree's name in the freaking blue book right here. Louis Dupree of 102 West 116th Street, aka Brother Louis. Subject was treated for laceration of the forehead. So he was clearly involved in some scrum in there, no matter what.
He was what they call an aided case. And that's where, if we get into the Black Liberation Army, and that's where he was an aided case being treated at Harlem Hospital. And suddenly 2 FBI agents showed up at Harlem Hospital. And here's the word that's used. They were trying to spirit Louis 17X Dupree out. And the cop that was responsible for Louis at Harlem Hospital wouldn't let Louis go. And
see
so
that
they put him in a radio car, and 2 FBI agents got in the radio car and were talking to Louis in the back seat. They were also talking to Louis at the 24th precinct at the end of the day when we brought him in there.
Well, that brings us now perfectly segues into the whole specter of the FBI.
Yes.
And listen, I respect law enforcement.
And
I
they
don't.
never told us, by the way.
Right. I listen. I respect law enforcement. NYPD, really have a lot of respect. I have to admit that I don't have the greatest respect for the FBI historically. I don't know how you feel. We don't have to get into that discussion. But whenever I see the FBI, I don't get a good feeling. And it seems like from reading the history of this, which I never knew about, and it wasn't in your book, apparently you learned this later, the FBI is all over this case. And including with this Louis Dupree. So I want to talk about some of the and there's a journalist, what's his name, Mark from Judicial Watch, that guy's name, Mike Moron,
Micah Morrison,
Micah Morrison, correct. And I'm
investigative reporter, boy.
correct. And so this is an article that he wrote. I'm trying to get him on our show. He hasn't returned any of my messages. Maybe you can help me with that.
Yes, I
But
can.
because I'd love to have him on to get into this deeper. But it says here, according to documents, the FBI knew a lot about the suspected killer Dupree and the Nation of Islam, but little of that information reached New York detectives and prosecutors. We know now in 2015 that the FBI had a lot more information about the Cardillo case in the 70s than it was providing to us at the time. So talk about that a little deeper, Randy.
Well, I worked a tri-state kidnapping case of a 12-year-old girl from Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New York, and I worked with the FBI, and a great bunch of guys.
Okay.
It was fine, and of course, from I suppose I'm going to say maybe 1969 or so, maybe 1968. The detectives in the New York City Police Department would play against the FBI.
Mm-hmm.
We would play in a Catholic school up on the third or fourth floor in Manhattan.
Play what? Basketball, you mean?
Basketball, yeah.
Okay, all right.
And that's where I first met Joe Pistone.
All right, Donnie Brasco. That's right.
Oh yes,
we could do a million shows, Randy.
So he's come down to the point where he is and believes, and Steve is sitting right alongside of me here. Steve's married to my daughter, and Joe believes that he's the godfather of my daughter. He came to the wedding, so I go that far back with Joe. I mean, I could do 15 minutes just on his name. So right. Yes, yeah. So I worked with him. I worked with him on kidnapping cases. I worked with another FBI. I'm going to call his name Al Ginkinger, because he becomes very, very important much later on as an FBI agent as to what was going on. So that's how I know the FBI. And there was a draft at that time, and just like in any other neighborhood, the FBI would come up into the neighborhood and they were looking for draft dodgers, and they were looking for people who were in the Army, came home and never went back. That happened throughout New York City, not just in one community. So I got to know the FBI pretty good. Mm-hmm. So I was working on the Black Liberation Army when we talk about financing themselves. They were financing themselves by sticking up banks. Mm-hmm. And they stuck up a bank in Astoria, Queens. And Louis Chesimard, who is the husband of Joanne Chesimard, was part of the bank stick-up. Well, they came out of the bank with the money. They got in the car. They were driving away, and the police were chasing them. Now, I know that we've been so desensitized by the movies that we see, rockets and stuff. But, 1970, 1971 and stuff like that. I mean, they actually threw a hand grenade at the police car.
It's insane.
The FLAN, another group, right, actually fired a rocket across the East River to the 44 precinct across the the Major Deegan Highway, but it fell short into the ocean. So this is what we were dealing with in 1970. So after the bank stick up, I met Al Ginkinger, the FBI agent, and he has more history than what I'm going to tell you. So they got involved in the Black Liberation Army because they were sticking up banks. So that brought the feds in, and I worked with Al. In fact, we interviewed Joanne Chesimard's parents. He did the interview. Wonderful people. Wonderful people. And that's where we learned, that Joanne Chesimard, really had gone to school, college.
Not a street person.
Yeah.
A more of an educated.
Right.
And
right. So I'm a little out of stride here, but so in 1970, in the 28th precinct, we were experiencing, I told you, 2,000 homicides a year. It was not unbelievable, but yeah, there came a point that New York City, as far as killing people, right, or losing people, right, we were running on par, if not in front of Vietnam, because Vietnam was winding down. So we get a call, and there's a shooting, and he's Sergeant Plate, and he is black, and his driver is Artie Plate is the driver, and forgive me, I forget the sergeant's name right now. It'll come to me. And we saw how the car was shot and practically shot up. So whether it was a trial run or I have no idea. But even the other detectives who had any kind of military, and we all did at the time, you could see that this was not some drug addict that was trying to get even, firing shots. This was a well-coordinated. So that was the first that I encountered. The next thing that I know is that
May
of 1971.
Just real quick to your point, I have this article here. City police uncover arsenal of weapons. It's about the Black Liberation Army. They have a 3.5-inch bazooka, 245 caliber machine guns, M15s, semi-automatic rifles, 200 rounds of ammunition.
The New York City Police Department has a revolver with 6 shots in it. And no vests.
You guys were,
no helmets. Nope. And a lot of times, no radios.
Right.
No radios. The radios were in the radio car. That's why they called it a radio car in the beginning.
So I'm sorry, Randy, I interrupted you. You were talking about the FBI and the.
So I'm working one night. There's got to be some humor here. So I'm working one night, and I pick up a guy on good information. I pick up a guy that's wanted in a homicide, but he's also wanted as a witness in another homicide. So I put him in my car, in my own car, and I got a radio, and I hear 1013. They give me the address up there where Giant Stadium used to be, and it's really specific. Two cops shot. Mm-hmm. 2 cops shot on the way to hospital. So I have him. So I drive to the nearest precinct, which is the 32nd precinct, and I tell him to get out of the car, go in there, and tell who's ever in there that he's under arrest. He has to tell them that he's under arrest. So he went in there, and rather than go to the scene, I went to. It's not easy. So I went to the hospital. There was every cop in the world that you could see of, and it's usual, the cigarettes going, the language. Yep. I don't know who was watching the city because they were all there. Can we give blood? Can we do this and so forth? So when I went in there, I saw one of the boss and stuff like that, and Harlem Hospital has a morgue. So I went downstairs to, and Piagentini was down there. I know his wife listens to these things, but she's heard it before. She's heard it personally from me. So he was down there, and so one of the first things that that I notice is that he doesn't have a gun. The gun's missing. So we I'm not going to go into it, but we do what we're supposed to do. The picture taking, the undressing, and God damn it, yeah, looking in the hat, and there's the picture of the family, the wedding band, and so Jones was upstairs, so and he died on the operating table up there, and Piagentini. He wasn't shot. Piagentini was executed, and a lot of it with his own gun. So
I mean, it's clear when you read about these cop murders that happened in the late 60s and early 70s that they were ambushed and it was overkill. They were shot repeatedly. They were begging for their lives and they were shot. They were shot with their own guns after. I mean, it just crazy stuff.
So after you do that, you're then expected to go upstairs where there's a room set aside, and here it comes. It's now 3:00, 3:30 in the morning, and here comes the wife, and she was escorted by a priest. The night that they killed Piagentini and Jones, they orphaned 5 kids.
Oh my God!
So, and then you speak with her, and there's no two ways about it. I mean, we're going to move heaven and earth to get these guys. We're going to do it. So by the time the next morning rolls around and the dust has settled a little bit, and of course, they're taking credit for it. They actually are taking credit for it, whether you want to call it mission statements, mission something.
That's one of the things that I found very interesting is because in these books they reproduce those mission statements, the missives that came to the I think it was the press or I'm not quite sure, maybe even the police, the precincts. They were
to the New York Times.
They were very well written.
Yes,
extremely well written, and it then takes me back to who actually wrote them. Because were these BLA guys? I mean, I know Joanne Chesimard was a college educated person, but the person who wrote these missives was extremely a good writer, and I just can't see some guy who would shoot a cop in cold blood on the street. I just can't see them writing that well. So did anybody ever wonder, like, who's writing this? Did anybody ever analyze these? Figure out who was
so many of those things happen, and we're really made aware. We're made aware of it, but you're so, not me alone, and I would almost say at that point, I don't give a turd who wrote that. I mean, I want to get the guy, that did this,
who did the shooting.
Immediately, Twyman Meyer's name comes up. It came up in that. So I remember that was my first, and that was 1971. and that's
Right.
6 or 7 months before Phil Cardello, right?
Right. And
So then we're working the case. Who's working on Jones? I'm working on Piaget, and we're working, trying to develop as much information as we can. But the information is trickling down, and it's not hard to secure. And one of the things that comes about, which we did pay attention to, was that they were operating in cells.
right.
I'll number the cells. Like cell number 1 didn't know cell number 3.
Right.
But whatever the string was, however it was, I don't have any idea of that. But I will tell you, they were well armed. They were they would execute whatever they were going to do against the police. 1, 2, 3, well timed.
Right.
Yep. And it came down to the point that they were killing the police officers 2 at a time.
With impunity, doing jigs on the street, dancing.
What nationality the cops were: Irish, Italian, Spanish,
Right.
white, black.
Jones. Right. Jones was a black.
Right. They were killing the uniform. They were killing whoever had that magnificent blue uniform on. So, now it comes up now, January, sometime in January. Once again, I do a lot of this from memory. So Foster and Laurie are killed. Twyman Meyer's name, there it is again with others. And this is all in this now is in early 72.
Right.
Again, this is before
just a couple months before Harlem Mosque.
Now I am really working on the Black Liberation Army. At one point, Seidman, and there was a group, Nick Cirillo, the detective that I pointed out to you, he headed this up. And I was now working out of the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, the homicide unit.
Right.
And Seidman said to us, go get these bastards. And the other guys say that he said, and don't come home, and don't come home. I don't remember that part of it. And don't come home until you don't get them. Right. All right. So immediately after that, the district attorney Hogan is living on Riverside Drive, and a radio car is sent there because there are threats against Hogan. And here again, they go by, and it is, and they shoot that car to hell, to unbelievable.
Right. It was like a machine gunning.
Oh yes, and that is where now another mission paper is sent to the New York Times along with the license plates.
Right.
Yeah, sent to the New York Times. So now the FBI. Well, as we're going through these cases, and we're looking through the cases, by 1973, when I get the Mosque case, even though I'm not finished with the BLA, I would wind up going to St. Louis. I went to Atlanta. I went to Denver, which I want to get into big with Denver, and I wound up in San Francisco with two cop killers.
Right, because there were incidents in Denver and there were incidents in San Francisco that were all related to this. They were used
not in Denver, but in San Francisco. So now, when I learned that the FBI were at the mosque before the incident, and the FBI were at the hospital talking to Louis Dupree, and the FBI was in the precinct where they brought Louis Dupree back as an aided case, and the FBI were actually sitting on the floor with him, showing him a book. Now, here again, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, right?
Mm-hmm.
They wanted Dupree and Bobby Hopes released because it was a Friday. They wanted them released. The police department wanted them released for fear that the city would go up. You know, it's nice and warm in April, and the city would go up, and they would come back on Monday to be arrested. Now, this is exactly what they did with the 14 people that they let go, which Congressman Rangel promised that these 14 people would be brought into the precinct. Well, again, you know, I'm not being a smartass, but as of this interview, they haven't showed up yet.
So all right. So
then at that point, John Van Lint, the assistant district attorney, said, "No way." And the assistant district attorney had them arrested, had Louis Dupree arrested and Bobby Hopes.
Right. Here's a little passage from Micah Morrison's article.
This really involves the FBI. That's what this story is really about.
Right. And I want to go a little deeper into this. So in 2006, this says here, James Harmon, former lead trial attorney in the Dupree prosecutions, raised questions about the FBI's role in the case. In a letter to Police Commissioner Kelly, Harmon cited Van Lint's encounter. Now, who was Van Lint again?
He is the assistant district attorney that caught the case and took us all the way to the grand jury. Harmon then came on board and took us through the 2 trials.
Okay, so Van Lint's encounter and 2 other instances the day of the shooting, when police officers reported sightings of Dupree in the presence of FBI agents at Harlem Hospital, where Dupree had been taken for treatment of minor injuries, and in the back seat of a police car transporting Dupree. Quote, the FBI presence was highly unusual and remains unexplained. So here we have the FBI consorting with the guy who actually, in your mind, and most likely in reality, pulled the trigger on a New York City police officer, killing him in cold blood. And then here he is with the FBI not even an hour later, and they're transporting him like he's a rock star or something. What's the deal with this?
Well, if I can get this out of you, I'm pretty sure, you know, why would the FBI be very, very interested in Louis 17X Dupree, who had a very high position in under Minister Louis Farrakhan?
That probably as an informant against Farrakhan.
Thank you. You said it, not me.
Right.
Huh? Yeah. Not only that, he chauffeured Minister Louis Farrakhan to the night of the Malcolm X shooting. He was Minister Louis Farrakhan's chauffeur, and his title is Dean of Boys. The Dean of Boys in the mosque.
That already raises my hackles.
Yes, the FBI, I think,
had their eye.
Well, it says here in this article, the confidential report shows the FBI had kept close tabs on Dupree for years. It noted that although Dupree had no official position in the Nation of Islam, he held a number of jobs, including driving Louis Farrakhan, right? And it did not list his attendance at so all right. So I'm just seeing here, even though Dupree is a member of Mosque number 7, the report does not note his attendance at a single meeting, and it omits the 4 months before April 1972 events that got Cardillo killed. So not only do you have the FBI transporting this guy around as if they're chauffeurs for him, but you have the FBI creating memos now omitting Dupree's role in all of this. It sounds like Dupree was a very helpful and valuable FBI informant.
You said it.
So
the thing is, the thing is, when we finally do get the FBI, after the fact, he was arrested for mail fraud and something else federally.
Who?
Louis Dupree in 1964 and 1965, and there's no disposition on those cases.
So in other words, they were never even
They know Louis Dupree from 1965, which is what, 6 or 7 years before the mosque.
right. And he was a full-fledged adult even at that period. It wasn't like he was a kid at that period. He was a full-fledged, powerful adult,
Yeah, mail fraud.
which is a serious crime.
Yes, federally.
Right. So here he is accused of a federal crime, no disposition, meaning it never even goes into trial, right?
Right.
I mean,
There's no disposition on it. So
this is screaming at me that this guy is a valuable, protected informant. And now we can go into all other directions. You could take it into La La Land if you wanted to. You could even ask the question: did the FBI create this incident and use their boy Dupree as the perpetrator? I mean,
you know, we can only speculate and reach so far. There's no way that what happened in Mosque number 7 on that day is that like anybody created that. It's the perfect wave. It's the perfect wave. So what Nick Cirillo, the detective, with the head of the homicide bureau at the time, and the 2 assistant district attorneys, in hindsight, Al Ginkinger, let's remember that name. There came a tape after Piagentini and Jones from the President of the United States to J. Edgar Hoover. And I can only paraphrase. And I guess we can get the tape to you.
well, I have it right. I have the actual words right here.
Oh, okay.
By God, let's get these bastards.
Go ahead, you read it.
So this is Nixon secretly setting up an FBI operation in New York that's going to be called a New Kill, and NEWKILL.
Okay, so you can stop right there.
Yeah.
Al Ginkinger belonged to New Kill.
Okay, so Ginkinger was in New Kill. So basically the whole point of this was Nixon's.
You talked to Al Ginkinger. I don't mean to interrupt.
You
talked to Al Ginkinger. What was the job of New Kill? The job of New Kill was basically disruption, because that's the only way that they could get information.
Disruption. Wait, I don't understand. Hold on. Disruption of what?
Disruption of, let's say, the Panthers. Disruption of the FLAN.
So in other words, infiltrating them.
No, causing disruption. And how do you do that? Well, it's easy. You call one group and say, you know what I heard? And that was the job of New Kill. Now, remember, there were 5 terribly redacted on our reports informants on the day. I know we're talking of the mosque, but we're talking about the FBI. There were 5 informants in the mosque on April 14, 1972, and none of them belonged to the New York City Police Department. They were informants. And of course, once we got the reports and we saw it, it's all the names are redacted out. On one report, there's 6. There's 6 of them. Of course, we never got a chance to talk to them. And this is all after the fact. So what New Kill's job was to literally make phone calls. If they didn't make phone calls themselves. Now, here is what months of discussions and could this be and could that be and blah, blah, blah. Does it look like the FBI called under New Kill? The FBI called one of their informants in the mosque. And you have to remember now, if we're talking about an informant doing this, certainly Minister Louis Farrakhan and them, they don't know about this. And if they called one of their informants and to say what the phone call said, I'm a police officer. I'm on the second floor of the mosque, 102. But any cop that would have heard that would have known that it was a phony call. There was no
Right.
credence to that call. That's not the way a cop who's about to call a 1013 in.
Okay.
It's not hello, my name is Detective Thomas. I'm on the second floor. And of course, it wasn't like that. But if you're calling a 1013, it's usually on the phone. 1013, cop shot. I'm down here. Bullets fired. Blah, blah, blah. Here's the
Right.
That's the way it goes. Not the way that went into the mosque.
So let me just read this passage because this is a little unclear for me, and I want to focus it a little bit for myself first, and then also for the audience. So let me read this passage because it bespeaks of what you're speaking about. However, whether or not Dupree pulled the trigger doesn't answer the bigger question: who lured Cardillo to his death?
Yes.
The 1013 call, it turned out, was a fake. While there was an actual Detective Thomas working at the 28th precinct, he didn't make the call.
No,
Who lured the police to the second floor of the mosque during a time of political and racial unrest has never been answered. Some believe it was a Nation of Islam member trying to incite a confrontation. Others note that prank calls were common at the time, and some say random person was trying to mess with the police. But there is another disturbing possibility: the FBI. So, all right, so here Micah Morrison is saying that the FBI might have called in the fake 1013, and you just mentioned something. Can you reconcile this for me so it makes a little bit more sense?
Yes, I can. Because from the tapes which you just read, President Nixon is saying to J. Edgar Hoover, virtually, COINTEL has collapsed, so we got to find another way to get these bastards, and New Kill is born. And by the way, he says to J. Edgar Hoover, call the Attorney General and let him know about this also. And I'm telling you, chillingly, it says on there, and Edgar, this cannot come back to the White House.
Well, that's what I was going to say here. It says FBI resources would be poured into the NYPD. In return, Hoover demanded only one condition: complete secrecy. The FBI's involvement would never be acknowledged.
Exactly. And so it was New Kill, and it was to call disruption. So it's very easy to come to the conclusion that, a phone call was made from the mosque.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Minister Louis Farrakhan and Captain Joe, all the people that were in there, I mean, I don't know what purpose they would gain if Minister Louis Farrakhan said to some guy, make this phone call.
So the FBI
would gain out of this is the FBI.
Why? Because they're disrupting.
Absolutely. What's going to happen?
These radical groups.
What's going to happen is the police cars are going to race to the mosque. The people in the mosque are going to get out. There's going to be a confrontation. There's going to be whatever it's going to be, and the FBI has the world on wiretaps.
So in other words, in this secret thing called Operation New Kill, the FBI was kind of working at different purposes from the NYPD. The FBI was kind of trying to disrupt these groups, whereas the NYPD is trying to bust these groups. Two totally different things. And then so this is actually evil. If the FBI called in a fake 1013, because then again, who knew that there was a Detective Thomas? Somebody had to have that information because there was a Detective Thomas at the 28 precinct. Right. So you're saying that it's a possibility that the FBI itself called in this fake 1013, which then started this incident.
I believe Micah Morrison spells it out a lot better than me.
Right.
For what he wrote. What he wrote in the Post.
We got to get Micah on this show. This is too important.
I believe he's listening right now.
Because let me tell you something. we have historical knowledge now. In 1968, 70, 72, there was no historical knowledge of the FBI setting people up, right? Like we have this incident that happened in my neighborhood in Riverdale, the synagogue bombers, right? The Newburgh Four. They took four retards from Newburgh and they kind of entrapped them into bombing these synagogues. And so the FBI, in my opinion, has no problem faking events and creating events for whatever purpose. Okay. So maybe this was an early run. Maybe this was an early experiment. I'm not saying that it was, and I'm not asking you to agree or disagree, but something sounds extremely suspect about the FBI possibly calling in this, which then leads to the death of a police officer. I mean, and then of course their boy Dupree, who they've had since 1964, is a central figure in this.
Well, two things I want to bring up. Yes, I get credit for breaking the case. What I like to get credit for is putting the case together, and I would have never put the case together without the FBI.
Okay,
right. Were we working, as they call it, on the grid? No.
What does that mean? What does that mean on the grid?
Will you find paperwork from the police department or paperwork in the FBI that at safe houses I met with the FBI and what I was asking for I got.
Mm-hmm.
I got.
Uh-huh.
And without that, no, I would not have been able to put to put it together.
Right, but here's a question though. At this time, in real time, in 1972, 73, 74, you were unaware of this FBI new kill and the possibility that the FBI called this in.
Unaware of the blue book, unaware of that? Absolutely, yes.
All right, so you can be forgiven in a sense for not knowing about this because they kept it from you. But how would you have felt about the FBI if you had known this? Would your investigation have gone in a different way? Would you have been so because I mean you're very laudatory of the FBI
when you're starting from scratch,
mm-hmm.
like any detective, when you're starting from scratch, and you don't have a crime scene, you don't have ballistics,
right?
I no. Any kind of information, any type of creditable information is really accepted. By the time we got to 1975, and boy, we were in the thick of it then, threats and this and that and everything else. In the city of New York, we had a boy by the name of Son of Sam that was front page all over the newspapers. I mean, the city. Yeah. So
that's where I just spent the last 2 years of my life, Randy, dealing with Son of Sam.
Huge. It was a huge case. I mean, but I think this guy killed 13 people. I'm not sure.
Six, and he wounded 7.
Wounded 7.
Wounded 7 and killed 6. So this is unbelievable stuff to me. This FBI potential connection here is mind-blowing because first of all, it was kept a secret from you, which to me is very suspect. The blue book was kept secret from you, which is suspect. You had Wrangle on the scene. You had Farrakhan on the scene giving orders. You had Lindsay saying, "There's no riot here. What are you talking about? No riot. This never happened." You had Benjamin Ward separating the white and the black cops. It seemed like this was just some crazy anomalous event. You yourself said last week, 2 weeks ago, it never happened before and it never happened after. So that raises my hackles. And again, I'm not asking you to make any conclusions here. I just what's your overall assessment of the FBI's presence in all of this?
John F. Kennedy said FBI stands for famous but incompetent. Well, let me tell you something. The FBI agents that I worked with,
Mhm.
I'd go into combat with these guys.
Right.
Now, I mean, really, really, really.
Right.
Okay, so there's a couple of things that I want to say to you before we're going to end or whatever.
Yeah, we'll end today on this.
I'm working on the Black Liberation Army, and Nick Cirillo is he's running the show, and it is Chief of Detective Seidman, Nick Cirillo, and then the rest of us, right?
Uh-huh.
We don't report to anybody. We don't speak to anybody, except Nick talks to Seidman. So we go to St. Louis, and this is important. We go to St. Louis, and Jackson's killed out there. Sometimes I get a little confused. I think that we got Piagentini's gun in St. Louis. I'm not sure, and brought that back. I go to Atlanta. Twyman Myers is involved in an altercation. A shot is fired down there, and it is Twyman Myers. We go to Atlanta. Okay, I know. So eventually, with the information that has been developed, and some of it, I can't. So we find out where Twyman Myers is, and I get a phone call, and he's up in the Bronx, so forth and so on. And Twyman Myers and myself, through the Amsterdam News, have been trading papers, trading sentences. I'll get you, you'll get me. Hey, I'll meet you in the street, blah, 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 so forth. So I get up there, and there's two FBI agents, an inspector, and a couple of other people up there. And sure enough, Twyman Myers comes out. This is in the Bronx, and he's got a machine pistol, and he lets it go. Shots are fired. One of the FBI agents is minor struck, and Twyman Myers, number one on the FBI wanted list, cop killer.
Mhm.
I rolled him over. I identified him, and that was it for Twyman Myers. Okay, so now we're working on the Black Liberation Army. I go to Atlanta. I go to St. Louis now, and Nick. Now we have developed, but Nick has done this. We have got 8 to 12 witnesses, female, that hang a wit, partied, whatever you want to call, with the BLA.
Mm-hmm.
And we got them. Now, they're in various safe houses. And obviously, we're not telling anybody where they are. And there's a cost of this. And so the police department, they're not always, but the police department, the guy comes over from the Puzzle Palace, which is 1 PP, and he's at Nick, and he's saying, how much longer are you going to keep them? We can't afford the cost of what's going on. We can't, of course. And of course, Nick is saying to them, there are people out there that are killing cops. They're not killing DAs. They're not killing you. They're killing cops. And these are the people that are going to help us to do it and stuff like that. And they don't want to listen to it. So finally, when he's come walking down the hall again, and it was generally every 2 weeks or so, and I'm witnessing this, he comes walking down the hall, and Cirillo and Nick Cirillo puts up his hand, and he says, before you get here, as long as it takes, that's as long as I'm going to keep them.
Mm.
The guy turned around and walked. Now, this also is important. By this time, Felix Rohatyn, and I believe he was the controller of the city at that time, the city was 4 hours from going broke. Supposedly, Ford, who's now the president, a big headline in the newspaper, told the city of New York, drop dead. I can't believe a president would talk like that. I know he didn't. So 4 hours, we were going to go bankrupt. There's no money. There's absolutely no money. So Nick develops information, and how are these safe houses where they are? How are they being financed? Well, there's going to be 100 questions here, and I'm not going to answer them. There were 2 safe houses, one in Denver. I'm not going to say where the other one was, and they were directly financed not by Hollywood, but by Hollywood people. Hollywood people financed it.
Hollywood financing the BLA.
Yes. No, the safe houses.
Safe houses.
Yes. And not only that, there was a couple of sports figures who were doing the same thing. Now, remember, we were running up against Patty Hearst and the Sudanese Liberation Army. So those safe houses might have been for Patty Hearst and them. That's exactly where they were keeping Patty Hearst and them, in safe houses. So Nick says to me, we got to go to Denver. The BLA has the best armament that you can believe that's happening. We got to go to Denver. So without question, we're going to Denver. And so the Torres brothers, part of the BLA, the Torres brothers were very, very successful bank robbers in California. Accordingly, the saying was, they made a ton of money. They made a ton of money financing the BLA with bank stick-ups. Now, once you start doing bank stick-ups, the FBI is involved. So the FBI is looking for the Torres brothers. So we go out to Denver, and there's 4 of us, and they're the Torres brothers. And this information is coming from the people that we have in the safe houses back in New York. The Torres brothers are buying the best guns that you could ever think of in Denver. Automatic weapons. I don't know about rockets, but they buy them. And they would pack them up, pack the guns up, and they would put it on a Greyhound bus that was headed for New York City. And that's how the guns came that they got from New York City. And those guns were financed through bank stick-ups. I can only speak of, and they were prolific bank stick-ups. So now we're not going to drop the Torres brothers. We're going to try to find out when the people come to get the guns, who's distributing the guns. And this was in New York.
Right.
This was in New York. Now, there was no way that we could find out what Greyhound bus it was. We couldn't do that because more than most likely, maybe the Greyhound bus went from Denver to Chicago and a different Greyhound bus picked it up to go into New York. But that's how the guns were coming into New York City. The guns that Twyman Myers and Phyllis, all of them that had Jackson, Hilton, all those guns, that's where they were coming from, the Torres brothers. So now I have nothing to do with the following. The district attorney, Nick, and I don't know if it came from Seidman or whatever, dropped the Torres brothers. And they were locked up the Torres brothers. And we got the Torres brothers out, I believe, in Rikers Island. And I'm going to make the dates up. And the FBI and the district attorney and the Nick Cirillo, they're going out to interview the Torres brothers. Let's say they're going out there on a Wednesday, right?
Mm-hmm.
To do that. Tuesday, the Department of Correction calls the Manhattan District Attorney's Office and says the FBI just picked up the Torres brothers and they're gone. And they're gone.
So
I'll just finish up with one more. So, of course, they're fuming, and it is now, let's go find where the Torres brothers are. So in the end, we get some more information. This is Nick Cirillo. We get some more information that 3 cop killers are in San Francisco. We go out to San Francisco. Now, the FBI in New York, after Twyman Myers went down, the Nick and the DA's office or whatever, they wanted to make one of these three on maybe not number one, but put on the top 10 of the FBI, and the FBI in New York refused to do it. Now, when we got out to San Francisco, and now we only got two. One has fled. One got away. So now we got two. So Nick meets with the FBI out there, tells them the whole situation, and the FBI out in San Francisco, they make the one person who fled, right? They put him in the top 10. The FBI out in San Francisco. So now we have to have lineups. We have to, we're taking these guys back, the two of them. So a couple of witnesses are flown out in the lineup. Not only that, the assistant district attorney comes out. He witnesses the lineups and so forth and so on, and they're picked out. And so now we get the witnesses back, make sure that they're safe. The assistant district attorney is safe, and there is three of us left out there, out in San Francisco with two cop killers. First of all, it's almost like front page out in San Francisco. There's not a commercial flight that will take us back with these. That's how strong the BLA is. They're afraid to get blown up. So then Nick comes to me one day, and I'll never forget it. We're coming out of the motel because San Francisco, and they're investigators. They're the best. The St. Louis cops that I met, they're the best. I mean, really good guys. Mm-hmm. So Nick Cirillo comes, and we go to the station of where these two cop killers. They wanted in 4 killings. Nick turns to me and he says, the Manhattan DA's office just called, and they don't have the money to bring us back. Where would cop killers that have definitely been absentee indicted on 2 cop killings, but the other 2, they're wanted as they now call them, people of interest. You know what I'm saying? So we're stuck out there. We're stuck in San Francisco. There's no money to bring us back. Well, one of the investigators knew his cousin was a pilot. Now, could we have very easily got a federal plane to bring us back, to bring those cop killers back? Do you remember what happened to the Torres brothers? So
yeah,
we're not going to go.
You're not telling the feds anything.
Not going federal.
Right.
So now what happens is that this captain shows up, Irish guy, big captain like this, and he says to Nick, "You want to get back to New York?" He says, "Yeah." "Tomorrow," he says, "on my plane, 8:00. And there we brought the two killers back. Who paid? I don't think it was gratis. Who paid? I have no idea.
Right.
Who paid? And so we get on the plane, and he walks back, and he says to them, "If you got to take a shit, you're going to take it now. If you got to take a piss, you're going to take it now." He says, "Because you're in that seat and you're not getting out of that seat. You got that? You got that? And you see how you're shaking your head up and down?" And both of these cop killers, they said yes. So the 3 of us brought them back. One of the guys that we were with, I mean, he walked the plane from as far to the cockpit all the way to the back. He walked from San Francisco aboard the plane back to New York. Now, this was supposed to be done quietly, right?
Uh-huh.
When we landed, there must have been 50 reporters. We had to run and to get them off the plane.
Sounds like the Beatles.
This is the first time that I am saying, for the record, that we were with cop killers in San Francisco, and the city of New York did not have the money to bring us back.
That's insane. I mean, everything about this story is just wrong, in the sense that nothing seemed to have gone your way, and it seems to have purposely not gone your way, because people are taking witnesses, people are not showing you blue books, letting you study ballistics. They're telling you witnesses are going to come back, and they never do. FBI might have called in the 1013. It's just like I said, Randy, I'm obsessed with this story, and I need to find out more.
Well, I'll get you Micah Morrison. You'll.
That'd be fantastic. So, Randy, listen, great show today. Do you have anything that you want to add before we say goodbye to the audience?
You know, I just, I don't know. For me to say that, justice was not served, but we know who did it.
Right.
We know who did it. Also, every single one of the Black Liberation Army cop killers, everyone went to jail. I've heard people come forward and say that nobody went to jail for Foster and Laurie. Well, they didn't go to jail because they were killed. One was killed in Atlanta. One was killed out in St. Louis. And the last guy, whose name I don't want to call, who I shot, he now took a fall for his third drug, and I don't mean selling marijuana, drug deal, and he's now drawn a life sentence, and he was involved in Foster and Laurie killing.
Right.
So,
but still, there's got to be some frustration.
Everybody that killed Foster and Laurie, everybody that did Piagentini and Jones, and they all went to jail. This is not a sour note, but all of that happened within, I'd say, 5 years, 6 years, the 70s, in the 70s. But the only person that has never gone to jail or paid the price in any way is in the Phil Cardillo.
Right, Louis X. Dupree, the FBI protected actor. So, Randy, this was a great show. We didn't get to one of the topics that I wanted to get to, but of course, I'm going to send out to you the open invite to come back, hopefully, for another show where we can talk about this character right here, because I believe that we need to talk about this guy historically, because he was the mayor during these critical years of the rise of the Black Liberation Army. He was the mayor who, during the Harlem Mosque Incident and the immediate aftermath. And I think that this guy has escaped some critical scrutiny, and that we need to put that on the record for history. Your thoughts about this guy, but this is a show for another day, Randy. I want to say thank you so much for being here today. Again, living history, and we could not be more honored. So I'm gonna put you backstage, if you don't mind. If you would wait just a minute while I see the audience on out, so we could say, please.
Micah Morrison, Nick Cirillo, Brian, Paul, Kenny. I don't have to say goodbye to Steve Brienza, who makes all of this possible.
Steve's a good guy. Yep.
Yep. Yes. And once again, you are really, truly well informed. Yes.
Thank you. I make it my business to once I get on something, Randy, I become the first grade detective student of it. I'm a frustrated detective and cop. That's what I am. And I am having regrets as I turn 50 years old for having never become a police officer, but that's all hindsight 2020. But
if I find a spare gold shield, I'll
thanks, man. So listen, just hang out backstage. Of course, we're going to invite you back for another show, but let me just see the audience on out, and I'll say goodbye to you off the air. All right, man? Thanks you so much.
Take care. And
Okay.
thank you for having me on the show.
You are very welcome. Okay, we'll see you in a minute. All right, guys. Well, listen, this is important stuff. All right. We now have 50 years of accumulated history since this incident has occurred. We are smarter historians and researchers of things like the FBI and stuff like that. And now we're seeing the specter of the FBI involved in this. We don't have it fully fleshed out. Hopefully, we are going to get Micah Morrison on the air so we could really get deep into the FBI's involvement. But I gotta say, my spidey senses are running on overdrive right now. And for Randy and Steve and everyone out there in Detective Jurgensen's land, I want to say thank you so much for joining us today. And we will see you, hopefully, when Randy comes back for episode 3 of the Harlem Mosque Incident. All right, guys, take care. Thank you so much.